So I'm a nurse practitioner here with Ridgeview Endocrinology and the non-surgical weight loss program. And that's why tonight I'm going to be talking about both weight management and diabetes. So a combination of both my roles. And I just wanted to first, before we get started, just take a minute to thank you all for coming to the support group. And thanks to Anne for facilitating. And just take a second to say that I've really enjoyed being a part of the program and honored to work with a great team of coworkers and to work with all of you guys. So thanks again for being a part of the program and for coming tonight, and we'll get started. So tonight we'll be reviewing insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and the importance of weight management and diabetes treatment. So what is insulin resistance? So to fully understand insulin resistance, we have to start from the very beginning, and that is carbohydrates. So when we think of carbohydrates, we think of a lot of the foods in this picture here, pasta, breads, fruit, pancakes, cereal, potatoes, the list goes on. And these foods or carbohydrates are forms of energy for our body. So we can think of carbohydrates and the carbohydrates that we take in kind of like Goldilocks. So we need to find the right amount. We don't want too much, and we also don't want too little. And when we look at carbohydrate metabolism, what happens is when we eat carbohydrates, our body breaks down or converts carbohydrates into glucose. And then glucose is released into the bloodstream until a key hormone, that is insulin, helps transition the carbohydrates or that glucose that we eat into energy for the cells. So insulin is a hormone that we've probably all heard of. It's created by the pancreas, and it really functions like a key to open up cells and to transport glucose into them. So as you can see on this very technical scientific slide, there are essentially little doors on the outside of cells that are called insulin receptors. And the hormone or insulin, which is functioning as the key, opens up these cell doors or insulin receptors to allow glucose in so that our cell can use that glucose as energy. So when this entire process is functioning normally, it essentially looks like this picture. We eat the carbohydrates are then converted into glucose, and then glucose is transported into cells via the hormone insulin, and the cells, which are muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells, utilize that glucose as energy. But if we ingest or we take in too many carbs or we're eating too much sugar, this leads to too much glucose in the bloodstream, and eventually that leads to insulin resistance. So here's an analogy that I thought was helpful to understand this concept of insulin resistance a little bit more. I love to travel, and some would say that I am a bit of an overpacker. So I could relate to this, and I hope that you all can too. So on the slide, the suitcase represents, and the overflowing clothes coming out of the suitcase that are packed in there represent glucose or sugar. So as you can see, there's way too much glucose or clothes being packed into the suitcase or the cell. Now, the excess glucose or the excess clothes that are hanging over are like excess glucose that's hanging out in the bloodstream, causing high blood sugars. Now, if you are an expert packer like myself, and you can effectively jam all those clothes and all those outfits into your suitcase, you know that once that overpacked suitcase is finally zipped shut, the suitcase kind of takes a different shape and it doesn't really look like it originally did. Now, this is similar to what happens to our cells. So once the cells have been packed with glucose and sugar, the cells essentially change. And so specifically, those insulin receptors or the doors on the outside of the cells change. And when these change, the insulin keys that are floating around don't work to actually open up those cells and let the glucose in. Now, your pancreas is efficient and it continues to make extra insulin to compensate for that extra glucose floating around. So essentially more keys are being made, but the locks on the doors or the insulin receptors have changed. And so the keys just don't work. Now, the cells or the doors are essentially resistant to the keys or the insulin, and this is what is called insulin resistance. Now, when we talk about treating insulin resistance, we generally focus on three main forms of treatment. And number one is diet. So there's several diet changes that can help reduce insulin resistance, and here are a few recommendations. So it's important to avoid processed foods. These are digested quickly and can spike blood sugars. Additionally, it's important to avoid saturated fats, as these have been associated with worsening insulin resistance. Eating high fiber and mixed meals with equal parts protein, complex carbs, and fat actually slow digestion, and this gives your pancreas a break so it doesn't have to work as hard for those blood sugar spikes. Similarly, eating low glycemic foods, which are slowly digested carbohydrates, kind of gives your pancreas a break too. And then if we just limit the carbohydrates and sugars that we actually take in, we are essentially just reducing the amount of glucose that your body's taking in, and that reduces the amount of insulin or insulin resistance. Number two is exercise. So regular activity or physical activity can actually help the body respond better to insulin, or makes your body more insulin sensitive. It improves insulin resistance because our muscle cells use up that excess glucose from the bloodstream, and we are really burning off the extra glucose. Now, number three is a combination of diet and exercise, which is weight loss. Weight loss is especially important in reducing insulin resistance, and there was an interesting study called the Diabetes Prevention Program that showed the impact of weight loss on reducing insulin resistance and actually preventing the development of type 2 diabetes. And it showed that a weight loss of 5 to 7% can actually reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 58%. So it's pretty significant. Now, if diet, exercise, and weight loss changes aren't implemented, insulin resistance can actually eventually turn into type 2 diabetes. And this slide here shows how this process happens. And so what happens is the pancreas starts to work extra hard to make up for the insulin resistant cells or the excess glucose in the blood. And over time, the blood sugars in the blood will become slightly elevated, but not high enough to be called diabetes. And at this point, we classify it as impaired glucose tolerance, or better known as prediabetes. And if this continues, eventually the pancreas and the beta cells of the pancreas tire out, and they aren't able to keep up with making the extra insulin, and the excess glucose in the blood becomes significantly higher, and that's when we can diagnose it as diabetes. Now, here are a few facts from the CDC just about type 2 diabetes. 34.2 million Americans have diabetes, and approximately 88 million Americans have prediabetes. And with this diagnosis of diabetes, it's important to note that 90 to 95% of the diagnoses are actually type 2 diabetes, and a small fraction of them, 5 to 10%, are type 1 diabetes. Now, when we look at diabetes treatment options, we have a number of wonderful treatment options available today, and you guys may recognize some of these treatment options on the slide. In fact, recently we've had a lot of new treatment developments and advances in the diabetes world, which is super exciting. And there's also always ongoing research and development of new medications and products for diabetes, which is great news in our diabetes community. But even though we have all these great options and we use them every day, tonight we're really going to focus on the most important treatment for diabetes, which is diet, exercise, and weight management, as we just discussed. Now, when we think about type 2 diabetes as a condition, the condition is really insulin resistance, as we just reviewed. But when we think about type 2 diabetes in terms of the symptoms are high blood sugar. Now, the widely available treatment options that were just on the previous slide are really primarily targeted at treating the symptoms of high blood sugars, which is great and exactly what we want to do to prevent diabetes complications. But what we really should focus on is treating the condition or that insulin resistance, which is done through diet, exercise, and weight loss, like we just talked about. And to look at it another way, we can take the example of strep throat. So if we have the symptoms of strep throat are typically fever, sore throat, not feeling well, difficulty swallowing, and we can treat all those symptoms with Tylenol or a throat spray, lozenges, soup. But what we really need to do is treat the actual underlying condition, which is the bacterial infection, and we treat that with an antibiotic. Or for another example, we look at a car with an oil leak. The oil leak is the symptoms, and to treat the symptoms, we can just keep adding oil, and the car will continue to run likely, but really we should target the condition or the underlying problem and fix the root of the condition, masking the problem. So if we look into this a little bit further with treating insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes with weight loss, there's a study that was published in April 2017 in the Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism Journal that actually reviewed a number of studies that looked at the impact of weight loss on type 2 diabetes treatment. So what they did is it was actually a systematic literature search, and it summarized about 58 articles that reviewed weight loss in overweight patients with type 2 diabetes. And they reviewed weight loss, whether it be with just diets, weight loss medications, or even bariatric surgery. And what they found was a linear model that was developed, and it basically described the effect of weight reduction on A1C. And A1C is a measurement of the average blood sugar over a 3-month time period, and it's a lab value that we use to monitor diabetes. And the model that they developed in this study showed that for each kilogram, or about 2.2 pounds of weight loss, the A1C was reduced by 0.1 percentage points. And this is especially important, and it's interesting data, but it really can be utilized in our clinical practice to support weight loss as a treatment for type 2 diabetes and reducing A1C. And also, we can take this information one step further and design other studies that look into the relationship between weight loss and diabetes, like this one. Well, this direct trial was a study that evaluated the impact of weight loss on diabetes treatment and really had some impressive findings. So the study included participants that were between the ages of 20 to 65, and they had a relatively recent onset of diabetes, and they were diagnosed within the past 6 years. Their BMI was between 27 to 45, and they were not taking insulin. And the intervention group in this study participated in a very intensive weight management program. So they had a total meal replacement, whether that be with soups or shakes, of a diet of about 850 calories per day. And they sustained it for 3 months, and up to 5 months is tolerated. There was a food reintroduction step process within the program for about 2 to 8 weeks. And then it also included some structured weight loss support throughout the program. And like I said, the findings were really impressive. So after the 12 months, weight loss of 33 pounds was achieved in 24% of the participants in the interventional group. And even more impressive, there was 46% of the participants that achieved type 2 diabetes remission, which was classified as an A1C of less than 6.5% after being off of diabetes medications for at least 2 months. So this was really amazing and really speaks to the impact of weight loss on the treatment of diabetes. So in conclusion, I hope that my presentation was able to highlight some of the importance of weight loss, diet, and exercise. As you hopefully saw, it can reduce insulin resistance, help prevent diabetes, reduce A1C, and even as we just reviewed in the direct trial on the previous slide, can achieve diabetes remission. Now, with that being said, I hope the presentation was helpful and informative for you all on your weight loss journey. And as a final thought, as we continue on the weight loss journey, The road may not always be easy, and I think we all understand that, but I encourage everyone to not give up. And as you are traveling down your weight loss path, you may have a bad day or a bad week, but that's okay. It's just like getting a flat tire. Disappointing and frustrating, but you don't just give up and pop the other three tires and throw away the car and give up completely on your journey. Instead, you fix the flat tire and keep on going. So just a reminder that everyone, you're all doing great and keep up the good work and never give up. And here is a page of my references for the images that I did not personally create, but used in the presentation. And if any of you are interested in the 3 studies that I referenced in the presentation, those are on the individual slides.